There is a document, a government document, stamped and signed and completely official. It tells you exactly what I am. It is wrong. My mother is Nigerian, my father is Afrikaner. I was born in South Africa in 1972. And the government of that country looked at me, looked at the fact that I existed, and decided that I was a problem they needed to classify by. They called it apartheid, separation. They had a word for everything. There was even a law, an actual written signed law that said my parents were not allowed to love each other. They loved each other anyway. And then there was me. I spent 19 years trying to answer one question. Not the government's question, not the law's question, my own question. Who am I?
There is a kind of silence that is not peaceful. It is the silence of a room where everyone has stopped breathing. The silence of a question no one will answer. The silence of a child standing at a doorway, watching the adults in the room look at her and then look away, as though the very sight of her causes them pain they cannot explain. Adaize was 6 years old the first time she understood that her face was a problem. She did not understand it the way adults understand things, with words and context and history. She understood it the way children always understand the things that will shape them forever, through the body, through the tightening of the stomach, through the way the other children at the market in Johannesburg went quiet when she walked past, through the way the woman at the bread counter, a large woman with a pink face and pale blue eyes, looked at her mother and then looked at her and then looked at her mother again, as though she was solving a mathematics problem she could not quite finish. Adaize's mother, Chidima Okafon, kept her hand warm and firm around Adaize's fingers. She did not look at the bread woman. She looked only at the bread. "Excuse me," Chidima said in her careful, precise English, the English of someone who had learnt it as a third language after Igbo and then Yoruba, and who had decided that if she was going to speak this foreign tongue, she would speak it better than the people born into it. "I would like the brown loaf, please." The bread woman served her. She did not say please. She did not say thank you. She placed the bread on the counter the way you place something down when you want it to be gone. Chidema paid. She took Adaize's hand again, and they walked out into the harsh South African sun, a sun that did not care about race laws or bread counters or the politics of who belonged where. And Adaize looked up at her mother's face and saw something there she had never seen before. Her mother was crying, not loudly, not the way Adaize cried when she fell or when she was hungry. This was a quiet, dignified kind of crying, tears moving slowly down a face that refused to crumble. "Mama," Adaize said. "I'm fine, Wami," Chidema whispered, "my child. I'm perfectly fine." But 6-year-old Adaize knew, the way children know everything that adults try to hide, that she was not fine, that neither of them was fine, and that the bread in her mother's hand had cost more than money. To understand Adaize, you must first understand her mother and her father, because Adaize did not come from nowhere. She came from the middle of a story that had been written long before she arrived, a story full of love and danger and the kind of choices that cannot be unmade. Her mother, Chidima Okafo, was born in Enugu, in the southeastern part of Nigeria, in a household that smelled always of egusi soup and her father's pipe tobacco and the dusty pages of old books. Chidima's father was a school teacher. Her mother sold fabric at the market and could calculate change faster than any calculator ever built. They were a quiet family, a serious family, the kind of family that believed with their whole hearts that education was the only door that poverty could not lock. Chidima was the brightest of 4 children. She read everything she could find. She stayed up past midnight with a kerosene lamp reading novels borrowed from the school library, reading them so many times the spines cracked and the pages grew soft as cloth. By the time she was 17, she had won a scholarship, a real one, a full one, to study nursing in Durban, South Africa. Her father had held the letter for a long time before he said anything. Then he said, "You will go." Her mother had said nothing, but that night, Chidima had heard her praying in the kitchen, Not the ordinary kind of praying, but the deep, negotiating kind, the kind where a mother is bargaining with God. South Africa in 1971 was not a safe place to arrive with a Nigerian passport and a black face and a suitcase full of dreams. The apartheid government had made the country into a machine designed to separate, to stratify, to assign every human being a rank and a territory and a set of rules about where they could eat and sleep and walk and love. Chidinma knew about this before she came. She had read about it. She had talked about it with her father. But reading about a thing and living inside it are two entirely different countries. The first time she saw the signs, Slex blankes, whites only, net for blankes, she stopped walking and stood completely still on the pavement, her suitcase at her feet, staring at the words, not because she didn't know what they meant, because she couldn't believe that a sign could say it so simply, so calmly, as though cruelty could be administrative, as though injustice could be laminated and bolted to a wall. A man behind her had bumped into her suitcase. "Move along," he had said, not unkindly, not cruelly, just as though she was traffic. She had moved along. Adaize's father was named Peter van der Merwe. If you are from South Africa, you will recognize that name immediately. It is an Afrikaner name, the name of the people who built apartheid, who enshrined it in law, who taught their children that the separation of races was the will of God himself. Peter van der Merwe did not believe this. He had grown up believing it, the way you grew up believing that the sun rises in the east, not because you chose to believe it, but because everyone around you said it was true, and you had no reason yet to doubt. His father was a farmer outside Pretoria, a stern and sunburned man who quoted scripture at the dinner table and did not allow certain conversations. His mother was gentle and sad in the way that some women in certain times and places are gentle and sad, which is to say, quietly, invisibly, so that it takes years before you realize the gentleness and the sadness are the same thing. Peter was 23 when he moved to Durban to work in hospital administration. He was 24 when he first spoke to Chidinma Okafon.
She was at the nurse's station, writing notes in her precise angular handwriting. He had come to collect a file. He had picked up the wrong one by accident, and when she pointed this out, politely, professionally, without a trace of the deference that the system expected, something had shifted in him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a door shifts when the wind catches it. A movement so slight you almost miss it, but then the whole room changes temperature. "I'm sorry," he had said. "You're right." She had looked at him. "I usually am," she had said, and gone back to her notes. He had stood there for a moment, holding the wrong file, feeling something he could not name. He would spend years trying to name it. The closest he ever got was this: "She was the first person in my adult life who spoke to me as though I was simply a person and she was simply a person and nothing else existed between us." Which was remarkable, given that the law insisted everything existed between them. They did not fall in love quickly. Quick love is easy to dismiss. It flares and burns and people say it was just passion. It couldn't last. It wasn't real. What Peter and Chidinma had was something slower and more dangerous. It was the love that builds itself from 1,000 small moments. A conversation stolen in a corridor, a book lent and returned with a margin note, a cup of tea left on a desk with no explanation, a look across a crowded room that asks a question and receives an answer, all without a single word spoken. They both knew the law, the Immorality Act of 1950, the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act. These were not abstract statutes in a law book. These were the kind of laws that destroyed lives. People had gone to prison for what Peter and Chidinma felt for each other. People had lost their jobs, their families, their freedom. Peter had told her this one evening when they had finally said out loud what had been unsaid for so long. They were standing at the edge of the hospital car park, where the fluorescent light did not quite reach, and the Durban night smelled of salt water and jacaranda and distant rain. "I know what this means," he had said. "I know what we are risking." Chidinma had looked at him for a long time. Then she had said, "Peter, I was risked the moment I arrived in this country. The question is whether the risk is worth something." He did not answer immediately. He looked down at his hands. He looked up at the dark sky where you could just barely see stars through the city haze. And then he looked at her, this woman who had come from Enugu with a suitcase and a kerosene lamp education and a mind like a sharpened blade. And he said, "Yes, it's worth something." 3 months later, they were married in secret by a minister in the colored community of Durban who had spent his whole life navigating the grey spaces of a country that only believed in black and white. The ceremony was small. There were 4 witnesses. Chidinma wore a green dress her mother had sent from Nigeria for a different occasion entirely. Peter wore the only suit he owned. They did not take photographs. It was, Chidinma said years later, the happiest and most frightening day of her life. Adaeze was born on a Thursday in 1972 in a township hospital where the nurses were black and the doctors were white, and everyone pretended this arrangement was natural. She came into the world making a sound like someone who had just been told something unbelievable, a great outraged yell. Then she quieted and looked around the room with the ancient evaluating gaze of newborns everywhere. Chidinma held her and said in Igbo, "Odimma Noami, you are here, you are safe." Peter held her and said nothing for a long time. Then he said in a voice that did not sound like his normal voice at all, "She is perfect." She was perfect, and she was also, under the laws of South Africa in 1972, a crime. Not a person, a crime. The apartheid system classified people at birth: white, black, colored, Indian. Adaeze did not fit neatly into any of these categories. She had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's strong, sure brow, and she had her father's light brown complexion, not quite dark, not quite light, something that the system would classify as colored, which in South Africa did not mean what it means elsewhere. In South Africa, colored was its own category, its own set of laws, its own territory, its own complicated and painful identity. This classification would follow Adaeze everywhere. It would determine what school she could attend, what neighborhood she could live in, what shops she could enter, who she could marry. It would be stamped on her passbook when she was old enough to carry one, and that stamp would tell the world before she could open her mouth what she was, or rather what the law had decided she was, which was not the same thing at all. But Adaeze was a child first, and children, before they understand the world's categories, simply live.
She grew up in a colored neighborhood in Durban, in a small house with a red door that Peter had painted himself, badly, with enthusiastic and uneven strokes. Chidinma had laughed at the door for years, a real laugh, the kind that reached her whole face. "It looks like you painted it in the dark," she always said. "I did," Peter always replied. "It was the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. I wanted to do something." It was the kind of house that felt bigger than it was, because it was full of both Igbo and Afrikaner things, and those two cultures between them take up a great deal of space. There were Nigerian proverbs on the kitchen wall, written in Chidinma's handwriting on pieces of brown paper. Onye wetara oji wetara ndụ. He who brings kola brings life. There were Afrikaner recipes in a notebook on the counter, Peter's grandmother's cook sister recipe, his mother's boerewors spice blend, written in a thin, slanting hand. There was an Igbo cloth draped over the sofa and a Springbok rugby poster in the hallway, which Chidinma had looked at with deep skepticism but eventually tolerated. There was always music. Chidinma sang while she cooked, high-life songs from Nigeria, their lyrics pouring through the house like warm water. Peter had a record player and an eclectic collection that included Miriam Makeba, which Chidinma approved of greatly, and some Afrikaans folk music, which she approved of less but accepted as part of the arrangement. Adaeze grew up inside all of this. She grew up bilingual and then trilingual, Igbo from her mother, Afrikaans from her father, English from both of them, and from the world outside. She grew up eating jollof rice and biltong at the same table. She grew up saying na and pa, and meaning different things by each. She grew up in the complicated, beautiful, exhausting middle of two worlds. But the middle, as she would learn, is not always a comfortable place to live. There is a moment that comes for every child raised between worlds. It is not a dramatic moment, usually. It does not come with trumpets or fire. It comes quietly, unexpectedly, in the middle of an ordinary day.
for Adaeze, it came on a Tuesday afternoon when she was 19 years old. She was at the University of Durban-Wakefield, one of the apartheid government's separate institutions designed for Indian and colored students, which in its very existence was both a concession and an insult. She was studying literature. She had her mother's love of books and her father's love of argument, and together these things made her a remarkable student, the kind whose essays her professor circulated to other professors with handwritten notes in the margins. She was sitting in the university library, reading a novel, Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, which she was reading for the third time and finding something new in it, as she always did, when a girl sat down across from her. The girl was dark-skinned, Zulu, with close-cropped hair and the direct, assessing gaze of someone who had decided long ago not to waste time. Her name, Adaeze would learn, was Nomvula. "You're Adaeze," Nomvula said, not a question. "Yes," Adaeze said. "Your father is white," also not a question. Adaeze looked at her steadily. "My father is Afrikaner, yes." Nomvula nodded slowly as though this confirmed something she had been thinking about. "And what does that make you?" The library was quiet around them. Somewhere in the stacks, someone dropped a book and the sound rang out and then faded. Adaeze looked down at her Achebe novel. She looked at the words. The world had no room for men who could not bend. She looked back up at Nomvula. "I don't know yet." And the terrifying thing, the thing that kept her awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her small dormitory room, listening to the night sounds of Durban, was that she meant it completely. She was 19 years old. She spoke 3 languages. She had been raised between 2 cultures, 2 histories, 2 ways of understanding the world. She could make jollof rice and cook sister with equal competence. She could sing high life and recite Afrikaner folk verse. She had her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's stubborn decency. And she did not know what she was. Not because no one had told her, because too many people had told her too many different things. The government had told her she was colored, a legal category, an administrative fact, a box on a form. The Afrikaner community had told her, mostly through silence and avoidance, and the particular pain of being not quite accepted, that she was not one of them. The black community, depending on who you asked, saw her either as someone to be embraced or someone to be suspicious of, someone whose light skin was a mark of the system's violence, a reminder of all the mixing that had happened by force or by law or by tragedy. And her own family. Her family was the most complicated answer of all. Because her father had lost his parents over this marriage. His father had not spoken to him since the wedding. His mother sent occasional letters that never mentioned Chidima and never mentioned Adaeze by name. They referred to your family with a studied vagueness that was its own kind of cruelty. Peter had accepted this loss with the quiet dignity of a man who had made a choice and refused to unmake it. But Adaeze had seen on certain evenings the way his eyes went somewhere far away, the way a person looks when they are calculating the cost of a decision they do not regret but cannot stop counting. And her mother's family, her grandparents in Enugu had accepted her in letters and in the single visit Chidima had made with Adaeze when she was 10, a visit Adaeze remembered in fragments and feelings, the smell of rain on red earth, the warmth of her grandmother's hands, the sound of a being spoken all around her like music she almost understood. Her grandmother had held her face and said something in Igbo that Chidima had translated as, "She has our eyes, she has come home."
But home is not always a place. Sometimes home is a feeling, and sometimes that feeling is always arriving and never quite arriving, like a horizon you can see but cannot reach. 3 weeks after her conversation with Nomvula in the library, something arrived that Adaeze had not been prepared for. A letter. It came to her dormitory, addressed in handwriting she did not recognize, thin, slanting letters on pale blue paper. The return address was in Pretoria. She turned the envelope over in her hands for a long time before she opened it. Something about it made her stomach tight. Something about it felt like the moment before a door opened on something you cannot close again. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and the letter began. Dear Adaeze, my name is Hendrik van der Merwe. I am your grandfather. I know I have not the right to call myself that, but I am writing because I am dying, and a dying man finds that the things he thought were certain become, in fact, uncertain. I would like to meet you if you are willing. I understand completely if you are not. Adaeze read it 3 times. Then she sat on the edge of her bed,
and looked out the window at the jacaranda tree that grew outside the dormitory, its purple flowers impossibly bright against the pale sky. She sat there for a very long time. She thought about her mother, who had stood in bread queues and absorbed cruelty with a straight back. She thought about her father, who painted a red door badly in the middle of the night because he couldn't sleep and wanted to do something. She thought about her grandmother in Enugu, who had held her face and said she had come home. She thought about Nomvula's question, "What does that make you?" and the answer she had given, which was, "I don't know yet." She thought about the grandfather who had never said her name, who had for 19 years looked at his son's marriage and his son's daughter and chosen silence over acknowledgement, who had, in choosing that silence, participated in the violence of the system in a way that required no police, no passbook, no sign on a wall, just the cold, clean violence of erasure. And she thought, he is dying and he is reaching for me. What does that mean? What does that require of me? She did not know. She picked up a pen. She placed it against a piece of paper. She sat that way for 20 minutes, the pen touching the paper but making no mark. Outside, the jacaranda tree moved in the wind. A purple flower fell and was gone. She still had not written a word. That weekend, Adaze took the bus home to Durban. She did not tell her parents why she was coming. She arrived on a Saturday evening when the air smelled of frangipani, and her mother was in the kitchen making groundnut soup, and her father was in the garden doing something ineffective with a rake. She sat at the kitchen table. She put the letter on the table. Chidima turned from the stove. She looked at the letter. She looked at Adaze. She wiped her hands on a cloth and sat down. "Where did this come from?" she said. "He wrote to me at the university." Chidima read the letter. Her face did not change while she read it. This was something Adaze had always studied and never quite understood. Her mother's ability to receive terrible things with a face that showed nothing. It was not coldness. Chidima Okafor was not cold. She was simply a woman who decided very early that the world would not have the satisfaction of watching her break. "I see," Chidima said when she had finished. "Mama, what do I do?" Chidima placed the letter on the table between them. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, they could hear Peter raking, the steady, rhythmic sound of someone doing a simple thing carefully. Chidima said finally, "Adaze, I will not tell you what to do. This is not my decision. But you have an opinion." "I always have an opinion," Chidima said with the ghost of something that was not quite a smile. "That doesn't mean it should be yours." Adaze looked at her mother's hands, folded on the table. Strong, capable hands. Hands that had held her through every fever and every nightmare and every difficult thing. Hands that had, more than once, been told to wait while a white patient was seen first. Hands that had, more than once, been told to wait while a white patient was seen first. "Do you hate him?" Adaze asked. "Opa Hendrik?" The word Opa, Afrikaans for grandfather, felt strange in her mouth, foreign and familiar at the same time. Chidima was quiet for so long that Adaze thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, I used to hate him the way you hate something that has real power over your life. But hate requires energy, no amo? And I decided a long time ago to spend my energy on other things." "On what?" Chidima looked at her, really looked at her, the way parents sometimes look at their children as though seen for a moment, every age they have ever been laid over the face before them. "On you," she said simply, "on your father, on this life we made that the law said we couldn't make. That's where I put my energy." The door opened and Peter came in from the garden, dusty and cheerful and slightly out of breath. He looked at the two of them at the table and the letter between them, and his face changed. "What is this?" he said. Chidima handed him the letter without a word. He read it. His face moved through several expressions. Surprise, and then something older and heavier, and then something Adaze had never seen on her father's face before and did not have a name for. He put the letter down. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. Adaze, and then stopped. Pa, what do I do? The question hung in the kitchen like smoke. Chidima's groundnut soup was beginning to simmer, and the smell of it was warm and complicated, and it filled the room the way it always had, the way her mother's cooking always filled the room, with the sense of someone pouring everything they had into feeding the people they loved. Peter looked at his daughter, this young woman who had his eyes and her mother's intelligence, and neither of them completely, and something entirely her own. And he said, I don't know, Adaeze. I honestly don't know. And the three of them sat there in that kitchen, in that small house with the badly painted red door, in a country that had spent decades trying to convince them they could not exist, and none of them had the answer. But they were there. They were together. And outside, the Durban night was coming in slow and warm, the stars beginning to appear above the city, indifferent to all categories, casting their light on everything equally. That night, lying in her childhood bed, Adaeze held the letter against her chest and stared at the ceiling and asked herself the question she had been asking since the library, since Nomvula's direct gaze, since before that even, since the bread counter, since the woman's look, since the first time she had understood that her face was a problem. Who am I? Not what does the law say I am, not what does my skin say I am, not what does my surname say, or my language say, or my passport say. Who am I? She did not sleep that night, but somewhere near morning she made a decision. Not about the letter, not yet, about something else. Something smaller and more important. She decided she was going to find out. Wait, don't you dare leave without doing this. If this story reached inside your chest and squeezed, you are not alone. Adaeze's story is far from over. She still hasn't opened her heart to Nomvula's question. She still hasn't decided what to do about the letter. She still hasn't sat across from the grandfather who spent 19 years pretending she didn't exist. She still doesn't know the full truth about what her mother gave up. The truth Chidima has never told anyone, not even Peter. And there is something else. Something in that letter that Adaeze noticed but didn't mention to her parents. A line she read 3 times and said nothing about. A line that changes everything. Part 2 is coming, but only if you let us know you are here. Like this video if Adaeze's story matters to you. Every like tells us to keep going. Comment below, I want to know. What would you do if you received that letter? Would you go? Tell me. Your answer might shape where this story goes. Share this with someone who has ever felt like they didn't fully belong anywhere because this story was made for them. For all of us who have ever stood in the middle of 2 worlds, wondering which one would claim us. This story is based on real memoirs, real lives, real pain, and real love that refused to be illegal. Don't let it disappear into the algorithm. Share it. Keep it alive. Adaeze is waiting for you in part 2.